Welcome to Brazos Matters. I'm Jay Sokol. College Station and the Texas A&M campus are beyond fortunate to be home of the George H.W. Bush Presidential Library and Museum. Bush was our 41st president from 1989 through 1993, the pinnacle of a lifetime of elected service. But it was shortly after his presidency ended that he and First Lady Barbara Bush began their long relationship with Aggieland. The Library Museum officially opened in November of 1997, and the Bushes were frequent visitors until their passing, both of them in 2018. But their legacies of public service endure through the Library and Museum, the Bush School of Government and Public Service, and through the George and Barbara Bush Foundation. My guest today is with the latter. Maddie Hillin is Chief Operating Officer for the Bush Foundation and is here on the run-up to what would have been President Bush's 100th birthday. Maddie Hillin, thanks for being here.
Thanks so much for having me, Jay.
Okay, so before we get into some specifics about 41 at 100, that's what this whole event is being titled, I want to know more about you because we haven't met before today. So what is your origin story? Where did you come from? How'd you get here?
Sure. Originally from Beaumont, Texas. Moved over to Houston for my high school years, and then moved on to Aggieland and was a marketing student here. Graduated, moved back to Houston, did marketing and advertising for a few years, and then my husband and I moved back to Aggieland because that's what people do, right?
That is what we do. It's a boomerang community. We
it's
find
a little
our way back.
bit like Hotel California, you know, you check in, but you never check out.
Yeah, that's really true. Yeah.
So we came back and for his work, and then I kind of stumbled upon a job at the foundation, just circumstantial, applied, got the gig, and have been there ever since.
So what did you know in terms of just awareness of President Bush and Mrs. Bush and their presidency and their legacy and so forth before you got here and into that job?
Yeah, so it's interesting. Living in Houston, I mean, of course, they were staples in our country, in our world, but specifically in Houston, you know, they were the low-key celebrities that you would see in kind of your happenstance day-to-day routines.
Right.
So Mrs. Bush and I specifically went to the same nail salon in Houston, and I remember my sister and I, kind of a couple of months into living in Houston, we walked in and there was Mrs. Bush sitting there getting her nails done. And It was just really kind of hits you in the face when you realize that. Obviously didn't say a word, didn't look her way because you're just so nervous. But she was always gracious and would make comments to you on the way out, things like that. I mean, she and President Bush were so normal. And, you know, humanity was so their everyday life, just being a normal person, walking around, doing the same things. You know, they weren't braggadocious by any means and didn't think of themselves higher than others. Right. So it was an incredible experience to just be kind of a surveyor in the Houston area around them, but generally didn't know much about them, just about the fact that they were Houston icons.
Right.
And of course, former president and first lady. But coming to the foundation changed that whole perspective for me, working and seeing how much people cared for their legacy and cared for everything that they've done to make this world better. It put a little stamp on my heart for the Bushes and the Bush family.
So tell me what your role as Chief Operating Officer with the foundation, tell me what that role is all about.
Sure. So I handle all the operational and financial aspects of the foundation. I would like to call myself kind of a catch-all. I've had the privilege of, since being a part of the foundation when I started in the fall of 2017, I have kind of run through the organization in all different aspects with general administration, events, marketing and communications, to the operations and management portion, so I've seen a lot of it. So I tend to get pulled into a lot of it, which is exactly where I like to be. And so it's kind of a catch-all and a general view of the foundation is kind of where I'm seen in the administrative side.
Yeah. And do you want to talk about briefly at least the mission of the foundation, what you're there to do?
Yes, please. So the goal of the George and Barbara Bush Foundation is to perpetuate the legacies of both President and Mrs. Bush, and that's primarily through supporting and promoting the Presidential Library and Museum in town, as well as the Bush School of Government and Public Service at A&M. So that's our main focus, is making sure that those two entities thrive and complete their missions, which of course is to highlight the legacy and the contributions that they both gave to this world by looking in the past at the Presidential Library and Museum. And then essentially the living legacy, the future, if you will, is for the Bush School to have students go into public service when they graduate from the Bush School.
Right.
And to kind of perpetuate their legacies through serving others and serving them well.
But the foundation's work is not just confined to Aggieland or the Brazos Valley, right? I mean, your work, I'm sure, extends across the country.
It does. And we have, and part of what we do as the foundation to perpetuate their legacies as well, something we do is really focus on programmatic elements and ways to really push the message of President Bush, because we desperately need that today. And not only talking about what a wonderful leader he was for our country and for the world at that time, but how that can be shown today is extremely important.
Right.
And how you can be an incredible leader and also a very kind, gentle leader through it all.
And I think that's exactly right. And I want to explore that a little bit more with you here in just a few minutes. But I also want to make sure that we cover everything related to the 41 at 100 events that are coming up in the summer. It's a celebration of George H.W. Bush. So would you explain what the importance of those events are, and then just start walking us through the days and the events that will happen?
Yeah, so we originally launched 41 at 100, a celebration of George H.W. Bush, around the summer of last year. And that's focusing on getting the message out about promoting President Bush's legacy and life through different areas of what he accomplished, which, as you know, is in a very illustrious public service career.
Right.
And so we've been highlighting specific programming through, former colleagues, former heads of state, things of that nature, who had a personal and professional relationship with President Bush and what his impact in this world really accomplished and continues to do so throughout this time. And that's the goal of 41 at 100, is to, like I had said earlier, really promote and push out that message of what he's accomplished and how his legacy continues to accomplish those things going forward. But the highlight of kind of this year-long endeavor of promoting his life's work and legacy is this 3-day celebration that culminates on what would have been his 100th birthday on June 12th of 2024. So June 11th through 13th is the week that we're going to be celebrating this. And I'll touch on the first 2 days, but really want to highlight the final day.
Okay.
So June 11th is the Alumni Day, and that's the opportunity for former colleagues of President Bush, those that worked in his throughout his entire public service career. We're inviting them to come to College Station and celebrate with one another in honor of the man that they worked for and that they all admired very dearly.
So this is like a reunion for them, right?
Exactly.
What kind of positions, I mean, just as an example, like here are the kinds of people who are expected to come together and celebrate and see one another?
Sure. So it ranges from anyone, this is very much the quote unquote 41 way to do this, is normally when you have a administration, a former presidential alumni gathering. They usually have it curtailed to the administration. But with President Bush's very long pedigree of public service, we didn't want to pigeonhole that. People that he admired, everyone that worked under him in every capacity of his public service career. So it is, presidential administration folks. It is those who worked in the vice presidency with him, when he was chief liaison of the United States to China, when he focused in on, director of the CIA. I mean, I'm not listing them all because we'll be here all day, but it's an incredible opportunity for people that are still with us that are able to come together, and they haven't seen each other in such a long time. And it's been 5 years since President Bush left this good earth. Right. And so it's really a good time to have a reunion and to honor him and to really utilize this as well as kind of a launch pad of reintroducing the conversation of what 41 did for this world. I'm
going to guess that this group hasn't been brought together in these numbers since the library opened in November of 97. Is that a fair guess? That's
a fair assumption. Yeah. And of course, there have been smaller gatherings that have occurred kind of all throughout because everyone is spread across the country, spread across the world. And there have been gatherings that have occurred over the years, of course. We have a dedicated group under the foundation known as our advisory council, who is made up of all 41 alums who, this is a bit of a passion project for them and something that they really want to do well and have everyone come and reminisce and commemorate this great man that they all worked for.
So this is happening primarily on the 11th and 12th of June.
Yes. So the 11th is the Alumni Day. The 12th, which would have actually been President Bush's 100th birthday, is really what we're deeming as a donor appreciation event. So we'll have programming that is surrounded by a book signing and book event that highlights Jean Becker's new book coming out, who was President Bush's former chief of staff in the post-presidency. She's coming out with a new book called Character Matters, which is very fitting for what's kind of transpiring in those 3 days, as well as John Meacham, who wrote Destiny and Power. I would recommend that book. He is coming, and he's coming out with a book that's highlighting President Bush kind of in a century's worth, with like a coffee table book. So we're going to be doing some programming around that. And this is really a time later that evening. June 12th will conclude with a celebration dinner for donors that have given to the new pavilion that's opening up. And so we're utilizing that as a donor appreciation event for that night to kind of come together.
So the pavilion you are talking about, that houses, is it correct, Marine One and the 4141 locomotive, I guess, train engine,
yes.
Right? Tell me more about those, because there may be some folks who aren't quite familiar with those particular pieces and the pavilion created around it.
Sure. So we were lucky enough on both endeavors. The United States Marine Corps and the Marine Corps Museum, we have on permanent loan a Marine One helicopter, which I'm sure everyone's familiar with, but just to kind of recap, that is a key presidential aircraft throughout the presidency. And it's the wonderful presidential aircraft that lands on the White House South Lawn when the president has to go and do activities near and far. And so we were blessed enough to have that come to the library and museum. And so we realized then that we don't have space for it in the actual library and museum. So when all of that was coming into play quite a while ago, we had President Bush pass away, and the monumental moment of having that 4141 Union Pacific locomotive come down the tracks and take President Bush back to his final resting place in 2018. It was evident that it became a staple of his funeral procession. And it was known all over the world And Union Pacific recognized that. And in 2019, they dedicated and essentially donated the engine to the foundation to permanently display on the grounds of the Bush Presidential Center. So with these two iconic and very large artifacts that we are now in possession of, we realized we needed to build a building for it. And so we started in, I would say, the fall of 2021, gathering all the information, all the necessary needs, and with the help of Texas A&M and the Texas A&M system, we were able to accomplish that with the piece of land that was provided in front of the library, and have been under construction ever since, and it's set to open in June.
So we get to go inside and experience it.
Yes, and we'll have an exhibitry for each one that will talk about the story of how both of these artifacts came to be and how they correlate to President Bush and what they each meant to him.
For all the events scheduled for June 13th, that's the Community Celebration Day.
So the June 13th, the Public Community Day, is focusing on bringing the Brazos Valley community in to play. So we'll begin with President Bush's grandchildren jumping out of perfectly good airplanes, as President Bush would say, in honor of their Gampy. And throughout that day, the pavilion will be officially open for the public to go in and witness these wonderful artifacts that we have on display. And following the jumping out of perfectly good airplanes, we will have a panel with the grandchildren focusing on their Gampy and the life that he lived and how that's emulated throughout their lives. And then we will have various amounts of family-friendly activities kind of throughout the day. And then the celebration will conclude with an incredible concert from Lyle Lovett and Robert Olkeen to really highlight and put an exclamation point on a wonderful 3-day celebration.
That is a big day.
A very big day. So
how do people participate? Do you just show up, first come, first served? Do you need to buy tickets? What does that look like?
Yeah, so we'll have public registration links for anyone to go to our website at 41at100.org, and you'll be able to do that in the coming weeks. So we'll be able to showcase that, and everyone can go and apply, but it is free. So come one, come all. We would like for you to register, but if you show up at the door, we won't turn you away.
Right. So again, for all event information and so forth, the website is?
41at100.org.
Okay. So moving on a little bit, and we touched on this some earlier, if you're of a certain age, you know a whole lot about President Bush. Mm-hmm. I am of a certain age. But we live in a very young community. So there are at least 70,000 of us always being between the ages of 18 and 22. Mm-hmm. And we are surrounded every day by tons of people who may not know much about President Bush. So what should we know about President Bush?
Well, I hate to say my age, but I fall in the younger caliber of I got to know President Bush and his life well lived when I started working at the foundation. And something that really stuck out to me is how masterful he was at building relationships and how important it was to make everyone feel like they were a part of something and like they were special. So whether that was introducing himself when he could feel as though he's at a restaurant and everyone's staring at him, or going and writing a thank you note after meeting someone or after having any type of communication with them. It was always that step ahead of thinking about the other person that we don't really see a lot today, and especially the younger generation, and really understanding how important it is to continue a dialogue. No matter if you agree or disagree with someone, you can still have a relationship with them.
Right. And
still focus on being a kind, decent human being, because above all else, that's what President Bush was.
And I think that's right. And I have some experience not only witnessing his presidency and certainly the time that he and Mrs. Bush were in this community, and their generosity and their kindness and all the things. But reading his book of letters, was it called All the Best? All the Best, which came out a lot of years ago, but it's a compilation of the letters he wrote to people throughout his lifetime, and it was wonderful. Even if you didn't care for his politics or you disagreed with him on certain things, you had to agree that he was a good man. And so it feels like, you referenced this a little bit ago, it feels like his style of leadership and just his humanity are so far removed from today's society. It feels like we've never needed it more than we do today. How much do you and your coworkers at the foundation, how much do you feel that when you're doing your work?
Yeah, I mean, we really do. You know, his spirit has never really left our office. It's really encouraging, honestly, to feel not necessarily a burden, but this duty to really hold him up in the highest of regards and Mrs. Bush up in the highest of regard, to ensure that people recognize that this is leadership that has occurred in our world at one point in time, and it was successful. And we can continue, we can get back to that. And again, it's really just having an understanding of what the other person thinks and being able to sit in a room and have a dialogue like you and I are having right now that is something that means more to our community, to the state, to the country, internationally. You know, we need togetherness now more than ever, and that's why the foundation is really pushing out 41 at 100. We're wanting it to be a time where people can come together and really, because like you said, Jay, you don't have to agree with the politics or anything behind it, but there's no evidence to show that President Bush was anything else but a good man. And so being able to celebrate that and understand that is important, and how it can be shown today is the most important.
Yes. So this may not be easy to answer. I don't know that there is a real answer for it, but I'm going to try anyway, asking you this. How do you guys at the Bush Foundation keep the momentum and awareness and relevance going with Gen Z and younger generations for 41 at 110, 41 at 120, and so on? How do you do that? Because again, for my generation, no problem. But for Gen Z and beyond, how do you do it?
That is a really good question. And something we've all been really thinking about over at the foundation. And for those that knew President Bush well, we want to use 41 at 100 as a launch pad to really get the messaging out there and the accomplishments and understanding of who President Bush was and what type of leader he was. And he hated the L word, legacy. He himself never used it to describe his work and his public service career. But that's our job. That's why the George and Barbara Bush Foundation is what it is so that he never had to do that. It was our job to promote his legacy, and doing that through supporting and promoting what the Bush School's doing, supporting and promoting what the library is accomplishing. And for us, it's highlighting all of the success that he had within his, one-term presidency. Quite honestly, and I'll say this as my opinion, he was the greatest one-term president. I mean, he accomplished so much in such a small amount of time. And that's something to really celebrate and to show. And how he did that was reaching across the aisle. It was being a master of building relationships, whether that was in the U.S. or internationally. I mean, there were world leaders across the board who thought nothing but the highest regard for him. And that's something that we need to show and continue to do that through programmatic elements across the country and through marketing and, marketing pushes and communications out to the ether to understand exactly who he was is what we should get back to.
The event coming up this summer is called 41 at 100, a celebration of George H.W. Bush, June 11th through the 13th. The big celebration for the community is June 13th. Mm-hmm. And the website to find out more and all things related to the event, again,
41at100.org.
Maddie Hillin, COO for the Bush Foundation. Thank you so much for the talk.
Thank you so much for having me.
Brazos Matters is a production of Aggieland's Public Radio, 90.9 KAMU FM, a member of Texas A&M University's Division of Marketing and Communications. Our show is engineered and edited by Matt Dittman. Learn more about us and check out all of the Brazos Matters archives at kamu.tamu.edu/radio or on the NPR app, YouTube, or on your favorite podcast platform. I'm Jay Sokol. Thanks so much for listening. Have a great day.